Well, if you're tuning in, it's Friday night, Evidence-Based Triathlete. We are just a little bit late, and you may be tuning in oh, thinking that I didn't push all the buttons correctly.
It happens. It happens for sure.
And you maybe have been thinking that we were going to talk about thermoregulation tonight, but we're not. We've missed our schedule with our thermoregulation person that we're going to have on, and we will get him on. It will just be a matter of time and coordinating schedules. So, sorry about the last minute change, but we've got some other things to talk about.
We do have some other things to talk about. First or second off, we didn't have a talk last week either, and that was partly on me. I was on the in Indianapolis, and I was actually really lucky. I was fortunate enough to be at the National Athletic Trainers Association's annual meeting and conference, and it was really a good experience for me. I've been to like I don't know, like 22 or 23 of these national meetings.
Mhm.
I always learn a tremendous amount. This time I did a dry needling course, which was great because I've
Good.
done a lot of dry needling, and so to get an extra course in was great.
Mhm.
I did a course on 2D motion analysis, and that was really well done. Did some stuff on emergency medicine, learned some little new techniques there, and then lots of other courses, but then also was able to, go to the trade show and run on some different treadmills and talk
Love
to
it.
some different people and, make some more connections that way in the business. And so, yeah, it's always fun to go to those things. Unfortunately, I got pretty fatigued from that week. I brought my bike and I actually ended up doing a race um, while I was at the conference,
I love it.
which was super tough to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it knocked me down for a couple days, that's for sure. Didn't get out of bed for 2 days after after a race.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people who listen to this that are familiar with conferences, and the amount of walking and the amount of time that you spend on your feet on cement floors
Yeah,
is, and even getting to and from the conference is not always easy. I don't know if you stayed at the conference host
I
hotel.
didn't. I had to walk every day. It was
Yeah.
I guess keeping track on my watch. It was 1,500 steps just to get to
Oh,
the conference.
yeah, right.
Right? And so I think the average of that week, or as like 4 days, I think I averaged 22,000 steps
Oh,
a
geez.
day.
Yeah,
Well, and a couple days I ran a couple days as
yeah,
well,
yeah, yeah.
and but that's a lot of walking,
It is. When
you know.
let me ask you this: when you're at the conference, what shoes were you wearing?
Well, they're very conscious of you need to dress professional at
Hmm.
these things. So, I'm like in a button-up shirt and like so leather shoes, other than the one day I did the 2D motion analysis.
Hmm.
We actually had there was like a learning lab along with it, so I brought my running shoes, and then I went right from there into the trade show, and actually
Mm,
that's where I sampled a few different treadmills.
yeah.
And but other than that, I was in dress shoes the entire time.
Hmm.
And like the other thing, this, like in the evening, you're like at social events and stuff like that too, and you got to look good. And my pink uh, Nike Vaporflies wouldn't probably be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing to wear. And
Great.
you have limited, like, think about it. I brought all my stuff to race,
Yeah,
plus my conference
yeah,
clothing attire and my workout stuff.
yeah.
I was limited on shoe space.
Yep. Great. That's right. Well, and wearing dress shoes more so than running shoes is, and walking around the conference. That certainly, I'm sure, contributed to why you were so sore after
Yeah,
both the conference and the race.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Mm,
I just want to talk a little bit about the race because something kind of unusual happened, and
yeah.
I was really excited to go and do like it was just a local sprint race
Yeah.
in Indiana, in Indiana, and first of all, local races are so fun.
Yeah. They are.
I know we talk about it all the time that we've got great local races here. I encourage everybody to go and do local races. Even if you go on vacation somewhere, you can look it up and you can find there's a local race. Go do it. Like, and here's the thing: it's like I didn't bring a disc wheel. I didn't have an aero helmet.
Hmm.
I didn't have an aero suit. Like
Right.
I went there just to think, like, I'm just gonna go have fun.
Yeah.
Like even the
Good.
night before, I was talking to my wife on the phone. She's like, "What do you think about the race?" I'm like, I'm just literally going to meet some nice people, to support triathlon, and to have fun. And that's like such a good thing too. And
Yeah.
like, and I know no one at the race, so there's no expectations,
No, right.
right? It's not like, oh, there's Ted over there, or there's
Mhm.
John over there. Like they're they're fast. They're gonna.
Right.
It didn't. I and don't get me wrong. Like when the gun goes off, I'm going as hard as I can
Right.
go.
Right.
But even I didn't even have my race, like my normal race bike. I actually had my old bike, because I'm like,
Mhm.
if I'm gonna fly across the country and do this, I'm not gonna risk
Yeah.
like my race bike for this. Even like
Or
I said, even
sprint,
my,
right?
yeah, even my race wheels. I didn't bring my race wheels.
Yeah.
It's because it just doesn't matter. If it was the national championship for sprint,
Mhm.
yeah, I bring all that stuff.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
So this was like, once again, a really fun little event. And the one downside with some of the local races is they're not run perfect,
Mhm.
and one of the downfalls of this particular race course was there was no course maps available online. And because normally, like we've talked about this race recon and like studying, and even for like a little thing like this, I'd want to kind of know.
Well, you told me this is not a race that just happened. I mean, this is a
This is the 30th anniversary of it,
30th year. Yeah. So it's
right?
not like they're just creating this year. This is an established race.
This is an established race. And so I thought it was kind of interesting that they didn't have that. And even the website is not, not great, but I get it.
Mhm.
It's a local charity basically running
Yeah.
this thing. And so at the package pickup, they have the maps there. So I look
Mhm.
at them, but I'm not familiar. And once again, I've got conference brain. I drove up to this place. It was about an hour and a half north of where I was staying, and
Right.
got in kind of late, and you know, just look at the maps. Yeah, yeah, okay. It was a
Mhm.
3.5 mile run, which is unusual,
Yeah.
a
Right.
14-mile bike, which is unusual,
Yeah.
and a 440-yard swim, which is very unusual.
Yeah. Right.
But I drove the bike course,
Mhm.
because to me it's more about like the bike course. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Because there was some technical sections of it, and I just want to have an idea of like what the road surface is like, and where I need to slow down on some
Yeah.
little. There's a few little descents that had corners, and I just wanted to see that, but I didn't really think much about the run. And so the run was where the problems
All
happened.
right. Right.
So I got off the bike, and it was an out and back on the bike, and I knew I was like about around seventh place
Mhm.
overall in the race. And so there was I can remember there was two out and backs on. It was a loop, but they're like two like spurs of out and backs.
Mhm.
And I'm on the first spur, and I'm like, I didn't see anybody. And I'm starting to wonder. I'm like, am I going the right way?
Right. Right.
Like I'm following. Like, there was a volunteer that pointed me in the way I was going. Like, but I didn't see anybody because there's nobody coming back yet,
Mhm.
and it was pretty far, separated from person in front of me and behind me. And so there's a couple walking on the bike path that I was on. And all the other differences, like here we can see people for miles, but
Yeah.
it was like dense forest.
All right. Right.
Right? So around the next corner, you can't see anybody.
Yeah.
So I asked them, like, were there other racers?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, man, you're in like third place. I'm like, well, no, I'm not. But
Yeah.
okay, thanks. Like, at least it made me feel
Yeah.
like I knew
Right.
there was other racers. So I finished this out and back, and then go back on the loop. And I know in my head there's another out and back, but I can't remember where.
Mhm.
And so I get to the next little intersection, and there's two volunteers at this little intersection, and I'm like, turn right, and they're like, no, no, go straight. And I'm like, are you sure? And like, yeah, go straight. And I could see someone way up ahead of
Yeah.
me, and I'm like, okay, well, and as a lot of local races do, they had a kids race, a teenager race, a duathlon. Oh, they had a kayak.
Mhm.
Uh, so you didn't have to swim; you could kayak
Okay.
instead.
Cool.
So they had all these different things going on, which was great, but that was a little bit confusing, I
Yeah.
think.
Right.
So I finish, and I look at my watch, and I kind of know where I'm at, and it said 2.8 miles, and it was supposed to be 3.5 miles.
Mm.
I'm like, oh my gosh! And I knew at a certain point I realized I didn't do
Yeah.
one of the spurs,
Right.
and I was embarrassed. I finished, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I cut the course, but
Yeah.
I asked I asked twice, uh,
Mhm.
and so I don't say anything to anybody when I finish. I just like walk. You go through the kind of finish shoot area, and
Yeah.
I'm just
Right.
walking. I'm
Right.
like, oh,
Yeah.
well, that's not good. I'm sure there's be like there would have been a little timing mat at the end, and I'll be
Yeah.
disqualified. And well,
Mhm.
it is what it is. I had fun, and a guy comes up to me, he's like, "Hey, did you do the second out and back?" And I'm like,
No.
"No, I didn't." He's like, "Oh, okay, nobody did."
Yeah.
So the first 9 people didn't do it because
Uh,
we were all given the wrong instructions.
yeah.
Now, I have, was it called culpable?
You have
And
an alibi.
I have an alibi. I'm like new, right?
Yeah.
The, a lot of the people, they like live in the area and they've done the race several times. Like they don't have
Yeah,
to
right.
stand on. So we're like, well, we don't know what's going to happen. If think about it, the top 9 people in a race go the wrong way. What do you
Yeah.
like as the race director? Like, what do you do?
Mhm.
So it was really cool. The race director kind of, he made a little announcement and had us all come over, and he's like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. The volunteers, they're doing the best that they can. They were
Yeah,
confused,
that's right.
and we fixed it after this person went through. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take your times and adjust them based off of your run
Mhm.
pace. Like
Yeah, yeah,
nobody was malicious and did
right,
something wrong,
right.
and it actually didn't change. It
Mhm.
honestly didn't change the order in any way.
Right.
Pretty much everyone stayed in the same
Mhm.
order. So it was really good that the race director did the right thing. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, it was it was. I think it's like my 90th triathlon, and something new happens every
Yeah, yeah, right.
every time there's something new. So, anyways,
Well,
that was a kind of a weird experience.
it is, and it's part of the triathlon experience, and especially when
Yeah,
you do those smaller races, and even when we do our club races, we do get guilty. I get guilty of thinking, oh, everyone knows the course, but everyone doesn't know the course, and we get new people joining all the time.
yeah,
And we actually had some people miss a turn at our last event,
that's
and
right.
we said, "Hey, we gotta go back to putting a volunteer up in this part, just because we do get used to being a local, doing the race over and over again, that everyone knows it and everyone does it, and even the volunteers may not, and so that's what it sounded like happened at your event. I historically have made a lot of wrong turns in my races early on, so
Oh, really?
I sympathize with you. Yeah, and again, not from not knowing the course, because back in the 80s, it's not like the courses were, we didn't have Strava, we didn't have, any mapping capabilities. You could see a map, but a lot of times it's hand drawn. It's not even an actual map of the course. So a lot of times you were literally racing blind. But yeah, no, I've made a few wrong turns along the ways, and I remember one in Greenwich, Connecticut, running through the forest, and it was part of the race was on a trail in the forest, and like you couldn't see anything. You didn't even couldn't see 50 feet ahead, and somehow I just popped out of this brush, ended up on a road, and I had no idea where I was. I was lost. I didn't even know which way to go. I didn't know if I was still on the trail or if I was off the trail. Now I'm on the road now, and there's nothing there. And so I just start jogging. I'm looking for people, and finally found them. And there's a group of runners coming towards me. And they're like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I have no idea where I am at this
I don't know what I'm doing.
point." And so I found my way back to the finish line, and obviously didn't finish that race, but it was more funny, a funny story more so than being upset. It was a good race. I was in a good position, but it was just one of those things. Sometimes you just make a wrong turn.
Yeah, I know. And as long as like there's no malicious intent,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Like at no point was I trying to cut the course. Like
Right, right.
doing that extra
Yeah,
half mile would
yeah.
have not made any difference. Like in
Right,
my position would have been the same,
right,
everything would have been the
right.
same. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was, yeah, just
Oh, and
kind of fun, something that, and I'll remember that race. I'll
yeah,
remember
yeah,
because, I went to Indiana and I raced in Indiana because
yeah.
but I'll also remember the race because of that. And honestly, I'll remember the race because the people were fabulous. Like I
Yeah.
met so many nice
Mm-hmm.
people, and I had a great time.
Mm-hmm.
My plan was to not even stay around for the awards. It was to get
Yeah.
back to the conference, but
Right.
people were just so genuine and nice. And I got in some conversations. I'm like, well, I'm going to wait and get my
Oh,
award.
that's great. Well, you're from Vegas. You're like a star, and that's just yeah, yeah.
Exactly. I'm a rock star. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's at that point the Knights had won the Stanley Cup, right?
I
So
know. And everybody was, that's all anyone could talk about.
yeah, yeah, right, right. Oh, how funny. So, do you have the finisher medal handy?
Oh, let me go grab.
Yeah, because I know you were telling me that was pretty good. So,
So it was cool because the finisher medal is wood,
nice. Yeah,
and it was the 30th year,
yeah, that's
right?
great.
And then the age group award. So I did win the age group.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome.
How cool is that?
Wow, that is great.
Right?
Winona Lake. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And like, this doesn't cost that much to do. Just somebody had the,
Yeah,
and
take the
whatever,
time to
an
do it.
etcher, and
Hmm.
it's all hand done. I mean, you can see like there's screws in it. Like,
Yeah,
but like to me, like that's really cool.
that's
Like
awesome.
that's a cool award,
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I think that was, to me, that's pretty special when you have something that someone in the community made it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, okay, so that segues into nicely the topic where we decided last minute to talk about, and that's perception of triathletes. And here you had a wonderful perception of this group of triathletes, coming in from as an outsider. And I
Yeah.
think that's so important that a lot of communities can be that way where they really, welcome people to come in. Not always, but it is great when you find those communities and can connect with them from different places.
Yes. Yeah. So this topic came up because I took a course over the last few weeks. So I did the U.S. Masters Swimming Level 1 coach course.
Hmm.
And it's something that I wanted to do for a while, is do like an actual like a swimming coaching course. And there was a live section of it this week. And so I'm sitting there with a bunch of people that are swim coaches,
Yeah.
and some have been coaching a long time. And there was a section on it like, well, how do you train triathletes?
Uh-huh.
Like, well, this will be interesting to hear
Yeah.
the perception of swim coaches. And granted, the section right before was, how do you retain swimmers?
Mm.
But once you have them in your program, how do you retain them?
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
almost everything they said about triathletes was like, you're probably not going to retain these people very long if
Yeah.
you have
Right. Right.
these perceptions. So the first perception was that triathletes get their information from the internet about swimming, and it's wrong.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't, I hate to kind of globalize that
Yeah.
all people like,
Right. Right.
and I don't know about you, John. I read a lot of stuff,
Yep.
and I do a lot of reading, especially about swimming and being a
Mm-hmm.
better swimmer, and how to
Right.
coach swimming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's all on the internet, all
Yep.
of this stuff. And there's good information, and there's
Mm-hmm.
not such good
Yeah, you gotta
information.
sift through it. That's right.
You
Just
got
like
to sift
everything.
through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was an interesting perception that these swim coaches had of triathletes, is
Mm-hmm.
that the information they're coming in with is wrong. And and I was in a room of like 16 people, so I didn't say anything. I
Mm-hmm.
just
Right.
sat there and tried to listen. So have you come across that perception?
Not specifically like that, but I can understand, triathletes, the perception of triathletes in general is a little bit more techy
Yeah.
and using the internet for a variety of things, from purchasing equipment to finding information, but not that that information is wrong necessarily, but maybe trying to find someone to help them apply that information in something like swimming. Um, but yeah, that's an interesting perception.
Do you know how you can, this is not a joke, by the way. Do you know how you can tell when you go swimming at a pool if it's a triathlete or not?
No.
It's super easy. John, I'm surprised you don't know
Uh,
this.
oh,
They're
oh,
wearing a watch.
oh, yeah, that's true. That's right.
It's dead giveaway that that's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
triathlete,
that's
right?
right.
Because like you said, they're techie, or
Yeah,
we're techie,
right.
right? True swimmers, they use a pace clock.
Yeah, that's right.
They don't, they don't swim with
Mhm.
their watch.
Yeah.
Well, not once again, now I'm perceiving everyone. There are some swimmers that swim with a watch.
No, but you're right. I mean, the swim team had never used a watch and nothing on the wrist at all. But now I always swim with my watch, and oh man, I got to charge it too. Now that you say that,
There you go.
I got to take it off so I'll remember to charge it.
Okay, the next one was that triathletes hate to kick, but they need to kick way more
Mm,
if they want to be successful swimmers.
interesting.
And this one I couldn't keep quiet on.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Uh,
I don't agree with it either. And when we did the swimming myths a long time
mhm,
ago, we actually did a deep dive into this.
yeah.
So I actually spoke up on this one,
Mm-hmm.
and because there was two pieces of it, right? There was that like that triathletes don't like to kick, and that they actually need to kick way more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I started off my rant by saying, I think you should really think about what you're saying, because maybe the triathletes don't want to kick because this is their third session of the day,
Right.
and they've done a 10-mile run and maybe an interval session on the bike, and they can't kick,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not that they don't want to. If they were fresh and like it's they had the day off yesterday and this is their first session and their legs are good, triathletes are known for wanting, like, basically doing the workout,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you take somebody that is their legs are already fatigued,
Yeah.
that is that you have to have tried it. Like,
Right.
go for a run first and then get in the pool and
Yeah.
say, because they're like, oh yeah, one of my favorite things to make triathletes do is 5 100s kicking on 2 minutes.
No. No.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna tell you, like, I'm gonna say no, because I'm like, my legs are usually done by the time I get to my swim
Mm-hmm.
practice at night. But
Right.
um so that was the one. And then that triathletes need to kick more in practice to become better swimmers.
Mm-mm.
So what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, I don't agree with that, and partly because a lot of the triathlon swims are with a wetsuit, and so you already get a buoyancy effect. It's like a swimmer using a swim buoy, a pull buoy, and telling the swimmer to kick. Yes, you still do some kicking when you're holding a pull buoy, but it's totally different than without the pull buoy. No, I don't. I am not a big advocate for a lot of kicking drills for triathletes. I think the most important thing, if you are going to do a kicking drill, don't use a kickboard and do more of a catch-up type stroke, as a where your face is in the water, you're kicking, and then you take a stroke. You're kicking, take a stroke, and you can actually practice bilateral breathing that way. That's a excellent drill, but not with a kickboard. I think the number one thing for triathletes to work on with a kick is the timing of the kick and the coordination of the kick with the upper body. And I think far too many people don't have that understanding of how to link the lower body with the upper body. And then sometimes they're working against each other.
I am so glad you said that, because that was basically exactly what I said.
Yeah.
I told them, I said, well, number one is most triathletes actually overkick,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they take the running
Hmm.
motion, and they have
Yeah.
too much knee flexion and knee extension, really.
Mhm.
And I said, we need to train triathletes to actually underkick.
Yeah.
And I said the exact same thing. I said, motor control is the most important thing
Yeah.
here.
Hmm.
And because a triathlete has limited amount of time in the pool,
Hmm.
teaching them coordination between the kick
Yeah.
and the upper body is way, way,
Yeah.
way more important than having them isolate out the kick.
Yeah.
And of course, people are disagreeing with me, and that's fine. But and then the last piece was, I said, the other thing you need to understand is when you kick hard, especially when you kick hard in a triathlon, you're burning glycogen and you're
Hmm.
burning fuel sources
Yeah.
that aren't really getting you anywhere.
That's
So
right.
if you kick, I don't know, 20% harder or
Hmm.
30% harder, that's coming out of your legs,
Yeah.
and that's the biggest muscles of your body that are doing that. And you might be going, bringing your heart rate up, once again, 10 or 15% higher
Hmm.
or a 1% gain in speed.
Yeah.
and you're depleting your system of energy, particularly glycogen or the carbohydrates that later in your race you're going to need.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you're going to swim, I don't know, 10 or 15 seconds faster, but you're going to run minutes slower
Right.
potentially. And once again, like, and I told him, said, listen, yeah, you're right. My swim leg might be faster,
Right. But that's at the cost of the entire event.
but
Yeah,
that's not my
I,
goal.
yeah, and that's what I was just going to add that yeah, you can work on your kick, you can have an excellent kick, and maybe you do your Ironman iron distance event, and maybe not 1:15, maybe you do it 1:13. All right,
Exactly.
that 2 minutes is not what the 2 minutes of the time that you need to put in to improve your kick to that amount is going to be too much in training. You're better off, putting that time into somewhere else. Doing kicking drills just extends out your swim workout time. And you're just not like, I love how you explained that with the fuel that you need and how the effort that you're putting in the swim is going to work against you later on in the bike and the run.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, kind of the nutshell of like getting into this conversation about
Yeah.
other people's perceptions.
Hmm.
And one of the things we have to do as triathletes is find people, find coaches,
Hmm.
and find swim groups that embrace triathletes.
Right.
Right. Oh, the other one was, yeah, triathletes have to do other strokes. And the one lady, oh my gosh, she said, because in triathlon, they do backstroke.
Right.
I'm like, Not unless their goggles are
Right.
fogged up or like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be around other
Yeah.
triathletes doing backstroke. I can tell you that because they're
Yeah.
not going in the right direction.
Hmm.
And then one guy's like, yeah, I always make the triathletes do breaststroke because, their hips are too tight. And
Hmm.
and they're spending too much time in hip flexion on the bike. I'm like, well, isn't that a hip flexion exercise?
Yeah. Right.
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 It's very similar to cycling actually. And I said, and what about I didn't say this, but in my mind, like,
Yeah.
and what about all the time they're running when they're pushing into hip extension?
Yeah. Right.
Like, your job as a swim coach shouldn't be to try and correct my biomechanical errors from other
Yeah.
other sports.
Hmm.
So, and I didn't say anything on that one either. I'm like,
Right.
okay, you guys can have
Hmm.
have your
Yeah.
perceptions.
Well, and this is where we disagree a little bit. I do see value in doing other strokes other than cross stroke and workout. But I'll tell you right now, I'm very guilty of not doing that. I am just doing, other than my cool down. I'll do some different things. But yeah, it's a time thing. Again, it's like if you've got a certain window to get your workout in, you know, maybe we're too type A, I don't know, but yeah, you've got to fit what you can in that time window, and the most efficient way is to use your cross stroke that you're going to use in the swim competition. Now, let
Right.
me just back up. I'll tell one story on kicking. Back in the 80s, when I was on my college swim team, which Division III, so not huge, we had someone join because he was a triathlete and he wanted to become a better swimmer. And when we did kicking drills, because there was a swim team, we did kicking drills, he would go backwards when he did kicking drills because his kicking technique was so bad and
Yeah.
his flexibility in his ankles was so bad that he'd start kicking and he'd go in the wrong direction. Totally different person at that point, not what we're talking about. And in terms of working on kicking, there are people who are learning swimming, and there is some
Yep.
benefit of learning each component of the stroke, but not as a focus with established triathletes or really people who are trying to improve.
Yeah, and this is there was talk specifically about like beginning swimming and
Yeah,
teaching beginning swimming. That was not this topic. This is
right,
people that are
right.
established triathletes. Because yeah, I agree with you. Like, if your kicking is causing you extra drag and extra
Hmm.
problems, like, yeah, you need to solve that,
Hmm.
right? Like, if you're going to basically
Yeah,
be
right,
going
right.
backwards when you kick, yeah, you definitely do need to solve
Yeah,
that. So
there's
yeah, I
some
agree.
obvious changes in stroke that you can make
Yeah.
and then help the person swim faster just for a few changes that they can work on.
Yeah. I love the fact that you mentioned the time limited, right?
Hmm.
And that's the other thing is, you get involved in, let's say a master swim group, and let's say you're doing 3 or 4 swims a week.
Hmm.
The other thing is and oftentimes the other swimmers that are not triathletes that's their whole thing,
Yeah,
is like
right.
those 4 swims a week or 3 swims a week, that's their exercise.
Hmm.
And just having the understanding, like, or talking to me about the understanding of the other things you're doing.
Yeah, right.
And like when the other thing we actually talked about was is not guilting people to get when they get out of the pool,
Yeah.
right? Like there's this mentality of, okay, if the swim workout is 4,000 yards and it's like
Hmm.
this is the group you're in. Well, if you get to the point where you're so fatigued and you're swimming poorly, or you got other things to do because you got 15 to 20 hours of training this week,
Hmm.
and you get out, there should not be, oh, why are you getting out? Like
Hmm.
it should be, hey, have a good night, or
Yeah,
have a good,
right.
have a good day at work, or if you're going in
Hmm.
the morning or whatever. The triathletes are already motivated to do so much more,
Hmm. Hmm.
and there are swim coaches, like I've had swim coaches in the past that made me feel guilty by getting out early.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, this is my third session of the day
Right.
and I'm done. And I
Right.
know I'm done and I'm hungry and I'm cranky. And
Hmm.
you've talked about
Hmm.
before, like how you tell when
Yeah.
you're fatigued is like when everyone else is being, what was
Yeah.
that?
Right.
Being an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And it's usually not them, it's me.
It's you, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
but I think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there
Hmm.
about triathletes. So that's swimming. What about cyclists?
Yeah.
You want to take this one? What are the perceptions of cyclists and
Well,
in
actually, it's interesting. While we were prepping for this, I quickly searched for a paper on this, and I found a research paper on psychological profiling of triathlon and road cycling athletes. And for the most part, the profiles were pretty similar. Again, I did a super fast read on this, but there were some differences. And the differences that they're identifying really came down to some mental skills and some motivation factors.
Mm,
And both of those are very characteristic of triathletes. I mean, mental skills, you go on and take an endurance event, or sprint, try, Olympic, you're going to have something that you're going to have to deal with. And we always talk about triathlon being a problem solving sport. I mean, that's a mental skill that you need to work on. And we've talked about this in the past. I mean, the more mental skills you can develop, the more successful as a triathlete you can be. And so, and we've got mental skills for swimming, biking, running, as well as transitions. And so I think that is that's a function of the sport, which is pretty cool. And then motivation, and you mentioned this already, is that a lot of times triathletes are not lacking in motivation because they're motivated to learn how to swim or improve their swimming. Then they also have to be motivated to improve their biking and then also their running. And so that sort of makes sense in terms of comparing those two groups. But perceptions of one group to another, and we should also say a lot of cyclists are triathletes, and a lot of triathletes do cycling. And there's recently a pro female triathlete that's moved over to the cycling world to compete there, and obviously there's a guy cyclist too, or a guy triathlete that did some he impacted the cycling world. I'll leave it at that. So but so there's these lines between these bicyclists and triathletes and even swimmers and triathletes. They're definitely blurred. But it is interesting. I'll just tell a story that I went over to see my brother in D.C., Washington D.C., and he took me on a group ride, and I had my bike with me for a race with my aero helmet and my disc wheel. And I pull up to the group ride, and I got called out
yep.
about using a tri bike for a group ride. And I said, hey, look, here's the deal. I totally understand, but I'm actually going to be more cautious being around you guys than you guys probably are going to be about me, because that's what I always get very nervous in group rides. I don't Group rides are, you've got to know your group, you got to know how they react, and you've got to find the right spot to be in at the right place, and you've got to know certain things about riding with others as well. And I didn't know this group, and they didn't know me, and so there's a little bit of friction that way already. And then having all my tri gear on, that was a little bit more friction. So
Yeah, and here's the thing: is like we've all been in those situations.
yeah.
And when I first started triathlon, I didn't understand it. I'm like, what are you talking? Like, I can ride with you guys. I got lots of power. I
Mm-hmm.
can handle my bike. But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know all of like the idiosyncrasies of riding in a group.
Mm-hmm.
And so the perception of like that triathletes don't have technical abilities. Is
Yeah.
that's a real thing, and it's not
Yep.
even a perception. In general, triathletes have less technical ability on their bikes than road cyclists do,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
we don't ride in these close, tight
Right.
pelotons and group rides all of the time. We tend not to do technical descents and
Yeah.
technical climbing, and especially not on your triathlon bike.
Right. Right.
And so those are real things, and you have to understand that when you get into a group ride, that these preconceived notions of others are there.
Mm-hmm.
And John, you handled it perfectly, like by coming right out and saying, "Hey, listen, like I
Yeah.
get it,
Yeah.
like, and I will be ultra cautious."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And some little tips that we actually talked about before were like, know these things if you're a triathlete on your triathlon bike
Yep.
in a group ride.
Mm-hmm.
Never ever be in aero position
No.
unless you're in the front.
Yeah.
And the
Right.
second somebody comes around you,
Get out of the arrow.
get out of it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because you cannot break. And that
Mm-hmm.
is super, super important. And this is once again a perception thing. Like maybe you're quick enough to get to your brakes,
Yeah.
right? But be very, very cognizant of that. Then that's why road cyclists, they don't like to ride with triathletes
Yeah.
sometimes, because they're sitting in a peloton and they're in their aero position, and that's not a safe. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a safe. It's not a safe place to be.
Right.
And then understand that you may not be able to like have the skill to be as close as everyone else,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
because you're
No,
not used to it.
no, that's so important. Don't be an arrow.
Yep.
Be on your brake hoods, or your bullhorn bars if that's what you have, and don't overlap your wheels. And you're spot on. I mean, a lot of people just are not as comfortable with other people side to side. I wasn't going to be uncomfortable or comfortable being in a group that I didn't know, and I didn't know how they operated with each other. And group riding can be a lot of fun, but I think it's more fun when you know your group and you know the rules that you each follow, and it becomes safer that way. So I just hung off the back, and I just stayed behind the whole pack, and I that was fine for me. And I did drop my brother though.
Nice. The other one I was going to talk about with this one is the perception that triathletes don't have any punch in their cycling and are going to get dropped on the climbs.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to happen to you. I'm telling you. Even in my heyday of like when I had a little bit more power than I do now,
Mm-hmm.
and I would group ride with like pretty good,
Yeah.
groups,
Mm-hmm.
every little climb I'd get dropped on,
Yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
these guys or girls could put out 1,000 watts for
Yeah.
a minute,
Right.
or not, maybe not a
Mm-hmm.
minute, like 30 seconds. I
Yeah.
can't do that,
Yeah.
right? But that's not my goal. My goal in triathlon is not to have a huge spikes,
Right.
right? My goal in triathlon is to have relatively steady, that
Mm-hmm.
we talked about when we did our best bike splits. There's gonna be some variability,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm never going to have 1,000 watts. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not me.
Right. Right.
I can tell you, I did a group ride with not even a group ride, just a ride with a former student of mine. She lives in Colorado, and she's a road cyclist, and she's good. Like she's
Mm-hmm.
a really good road cyclist. And we were just cruising along, 200 watts, just cruising on, talking, and every little bump,
Mm-hmm.
she was gone.
Yeah. Right.
That's how she rode, like, because
Right.
that's how the groups do it there.
Yeah.
And it was 400 watts for
Yeah.
12, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And then she'd get over the hill and I'd have to catch up to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk again, and the next one. And it was like, and finally I said to her, I'm like, why are you trying to drop me on every, she's like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing it. It's just how if you're in the group
Yeah.
riding
Right.
here, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And I'm just so used to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're gonna ride with road cyclists, like,
Yeah.
be prepared to be dropped
Right.
on those climbs. The other thing I can tell you is when I've ridden with them is if I have my triathlon bike, is on a long descent, if you get in front, they expect you to pull hard and they want you to, because like,
Mm-hmm.
or even a long flat, right? Because if you're on your time trial bike, oftentimes you can bring the whole group along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just a few little tips.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it is, this is the group dynamics.
Yeah.
And this is partly where, when I get with a new group, I want to understand that, because you don't know when they're going to sprint. Oh, it's the sign. That sign is the one that we all
Exactly. That's
sprint
the
for.
spot.
And
Yeah.
then we reconvene, and then this. And so this dynamic nature of the group, if you're just joining it for the first time, you really need to take the time to discover it. And this is a good point to even mention, there are drop rides where if you fall off, there no one's waiting for you. And then there's non-drop rides, and those are important to figure out which one you're joining, because they will wait for people if you do fall off the back of the pack.
The other thing is, and I'm guilty of this. I'm really guilty of this. Is I don't know all the hand signals.
Yeah, right, right.
Because I'd ride 95% of my time alone,
Mm-hmm.
but in groups and in
Yeah,
pelotons, there's a language
yeah.
via hand signals,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't use the proper hand signals, you will be once again kind of ostracized.
Right.
And so if you're new to a group, ask somebody, what are the
Yeah.
hand signals? What do you
Mm-hmm.
guys, what do you say? What, like, and there's even verbal signals.
Yeah.
And just ask.
Mm-hmm.
We're sitting around the parking lot of Dunkin' Donuts or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me what are typical, what are the typical signals you guys use in this group? Because I want to do the right thing.
No, that's a great point. I'm glad you remembered to say that, because you're right. And it's not only what hand signals to read from others, but what hand signals you need to give for the person behind you,
Yeah,
because you got to relay those hand signals that you're getting back to the next person behind you.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Any other perception things you can think of for cycling?
Well, I think I don't know. Some of the perceptions, we touched on the main ones with the handling, and there again, there is some level of truth to that, because a lot of triathletes do train indoors now, and maybe not have some of the skills or the regular outdoor riding that you need if you're riding with other people. So that's just something good to even think about, and maybe incorporate in your riding, that you are working on some skills.
The other one I was going to say is if you do have a road bike and that's where you
Hmm.
should be using on your group ride.
Yeah, yeah,
Once again, you were in a situation where it wasn't an
yeah,
option.
yeah. Hmm.
And before I had a road bike, I for a long time only had a triathlon bike,
Hmm.
and that was my
Yeah.
only option.
Hmm.
Um, but now, like, if gonna do a group ride, I'm gonna grab the road bike
Yeah.
unless I have no other option.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I tell people, hey, sorry, I got another option. Like, I've done a few group rides in California with some friends,
Yeah.
and I'll be like, this is the only bike I have. Like, I
Right.
came in from
Right.
Vegas, I'm training down here. Like,
Hmm.
and like you, I'm gonna say, hey, listen, like, I am going to be ultra cautious,
Yeah.
and I will be.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that's important as well.
Mm.
Okay, so what about runners and pure runners and
Yeah.
track?
Hmm.
What do you think the perception of like a marathoner or like a 10K runner is to a triathlete?
Oh boy. We'd have to check Chat
I
GPT.
did check.
Oh, okay. What is, because that's an interesting one, because the running community, there's different communities within runners. You have track runners, master track runners, you have road runners, and you have trail runners, and you have ultra runners.
Exactly. There's a lot.
I think I'm catching the major ones. I don't know if there's other ones. And so they're all a little, little idiosyncratic. Yeah, they all have their own unique features, even though again there's a lot of blurring of lines that people will do multiple of those. So what does Chat GPT tell us?
Um, the big difference is that triathletes don't run well,
Okay. Yeah.
like, which makes sense.
Yeah.
A true runner,
Hmm.
if you're running, let's say you're a decent half marathon or 10K
Hmm.
runner
Right.
or a
Right.
marathon runner,
Hmm.
you're doing 60 or 70 miles a week, maybe
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Right.
You're going to become more efficient runner,
Yeah. Right.
right? In general, like, you can tell, like,
Hmm.
when we all are guilty of this. You're driving around your neighborhood, you're driving to the pool and you see a good runner. They're usually a good runner because they run a lot,
Yeah. Right.
right? Triathletes in general don't run as well.
Hmm.
They're just not as pretty. They tend to use a little bit more strength in their running, and a little less have a little less bounce in
Hmm.
their run. And it's because of efficiency,
Yeah.
and also because of there's also some issues with a little bit larger upper body sometimes because of swimming. We get a little bit more little bit
Mhm.
more weight in the upper body compared to a pure runner. With the with the pure runner with the stick arms, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's the main difference, and the perception is that that triathletes don't run technically very like
Mm.
as well.
Mhm. Well, what's interesting when we look at the injury stats from triathlon or triathletes and runners, they share the same injury pattern. So,
They do,
yeah,
they do, but with a lot less volume,
yeah, yeah.
right? So the injury patterns are the same, but a pure runner will often have double the miles
Hmm.
on their feet compared to a triathlete. Um, so I think that's a big one. The other one is that pure runners tend to do more speed work,
Hmm.
um, and more track sessions
Yeah, right,
than
right.
than triathletes, and I think that makes sense, right? Because if you think about it as a runner, your goal is in every session, basically, not every session, not every I guess every session, and maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's the same in triathletes, is to run faster all of the time,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Um, but that comes with a risk,
Yeah.
and a lot of triathletes are not willing to take that risk, or maybe a runner is more willing to take that risk. I don't know. um,
Mm.
and maybe because triathletes tend to be more on fatigued legs all of the time.
Hmm.
I mean, John, you don't do a lot of speed work,
No, unfortunately, I wish I could, but
and me either. Like
yeah,
I'm the same way.
no. I just, the problem with doing the speed work is then I have to recover multiple days after it. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm better off being consistent day in, day out for the long term versus trying to have these peaks. And right or wrong, that's how I'm approaching it right now.
But I think I actually think you're doing the right thing as an aging triathlete.
Hmm.
Number one rule is training. Can you train again the next day?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Hmm.
And because you're always adding fatigue,
Hmm.
right? Like if you're training, like I know you 10 hours a week on the bike,
Hmm.
that's a lot of fatigue built
Yeah,
in,
right.
right? And even a good runner, they don't put in much more than 10 hours. Like I know
Hmm.
some decent runners. I'm not saying professional runners. I'm saying some
Right.
decent runners. That 10 hours of running a week is it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's a ton for a
Yeah,
runner, right? You're doing that on the bike, and then you're going to
right,
try and
right.
run. So I think that as we age, we really need to think about the speed that we run
Hmm.
at. And if anything, like we talked about earlier, is not earlier today, but earlier in our podcast, is if anything, as we get older, we're trying to unload even more, and like
Yeah.
using things like the boost treadmills,
Hmm. Hmm.
the light speeds and the
Yeah.
levers, and to actually try and extend out our careers even further.
Hmm.
Whereas I think a pure runner doesn't do that as much.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think I'll also say I think runners are jealous that triathletes can still swim. So,
Exactly.
because runners don't always make a good swimmer. It's hard. I think it's easier to go from a good swimmer to being able to be a good runner than a good runner back to swimming. Because swimming, if you start at a young age, it's a huge difference. So,
So I've done quite a bit of reading on like just and not even reading, and I actually I've even coached pure runners before,
hmm.
and the the perception is that you have to spend a certain amount of time going pretty dang fast,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you and I are both proving that you don't have to.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, you got to do some stuff a little bit faster than race pace,
Hmm.
but not an exorbitant
Right.
amount past race pace,
Hmm.
right? So, John, what's your 70.3 race pace?
Well, I do it in about anywhere from 144 to 150 right now. So that's
So, like
about just
eight,
over 8 minute mile. Yeah.
yeah, so 8 to 8,
Yeah.
or so maybe 750 to
7:30 to
8.
8 something. Yeah. Yeah.
So for you to go and say, let's get you doing 100-meter sprints in the 5 range,
Hmm.
it's not bringing that 8
Yeah.
down to a 7,
Right. Right.
right? You're better off to spend time in that 7:30 range, like
Hmm.
just a
Hmm.
little bit faster,
Yeah.
right? And when we look at, once again, at pure runners, because the paces they're racing at tend to be
Right.
faster, the paces that they're pushing past are a little bit further past as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we do need to keep that in mind, especially if you were to hire a run coach, kind of like you'd hire a cycling coach or hire a swim coach, that run coach has an understanding of the demands of triathlon.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to a really good run coach a while ago about this, and I was basically running through some scenarios with her about like triathletes
Mm-hmm.
and how she would design a program, and it was amazing the amount of speed work she put in. And I was like,
Mm.
it just seems like too much. And she's like, well, this is what I do with all my runners. I'm like, okay, yeah, but
Yeah,
that's the
right,
problem.
right.
Like
Mm-hmm.
these runners are coming in, you gave them a day off,
Mm-hmm.
got fresh legs, they can do that. The triathlete, they did a 4-hour bike ride the day before
Right.
potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like now you're really risking injury. And it was interesting to have this conversation with her. It's really eye-opening, I think, for her as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's has had triathletes that she'd coached, but they never lasted. That was one of the reasons she wanted to talk to me, is she's
Mm-hmm.
like, every triathlete I've ever worked with has quit.
Yeah, right, right. Well, they've gone to doing something else, not necessarily quit the
No,
sport.
they
But
quit with
yeah,
her.
yeah, right, right.
And she was frustrated by that. She's like, well, what am I doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I'm doing like it works for all these runners, but
Yeah,
it's not
right.
working. And it was really a good conversation that we had. Um, and even with the people that I coach, I'm really careful of not doing too much, uh,
Mm-hmm.
too much too fast.
Yeah, right.
So
Well, I mean, if we're going to train for an all-out 5K versus a sprint race that includes a 5K, those are different. They're not the same event, and so I like how you're approaching that. That the training for running needs to be different. If I'm just going to try to be as fast as I can on a 5K, that's going to be different.
yeah, it's actually interesting. It's one of the things that I've talked to some people about, that I've worked with, is during the off season.
Hmm.
Is okay, during the off season, let's train to run a fast 5K. If you want to do sprint triathlons, right?
Right, right.
Like let's actually train. Like let's
Hmm.
stay away from the bike a little bit. Let's decrease your bike load by half.
Hmm.
Let's
Hmm.
decrease your swim load,
Yeah.
and let's really focus on just training to run fast.
Hmm.
And it's amazing what a triathlete can do if they do that,
Yeah.
right? And they can actually become relatively fast
Hmm.
relatively quickly if you
Hmm.
take all that other fatigue away.
Right.
But when you have that fatigue, it's really hard.
Well, and that's where, triathlon's a sport, and you got to train that triathlon aspect, that three sport aspect in your training program, and you
But that's
can't.
the beauty of it.
It is. That's the fun part because you can't just go swim with the swimmers, bike with the bikers, run with the runners. You can't do that. That's not sustainable because each of them have their sport and they're all trying to make that their priority. And you can't prioritize all three sports at the same time. It's just
We're trying to be moderately successful at all three
that's
sports.
right.
It's so funny we talk like this because even today, right? I got in a Zwift ride this afternoon, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do an hour and a half on Zwift, and I'm going to go pretty hard. Today was a day for me to go hard in my schedule, and I got into this group ride, and these guys crushed me.
Hmm.
And my plan was to run after, and I was only going to run 10 minutes after. I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah, right.
So I ran yesterday. I'm going to run again tomorrow. And I got to think like that. Like, it's like in my mind, I want to do just a 10-minute run,
Hmm.
but I was just mentally done, after basically, destroying myself for an hour and a half.
Hmm.
Like I barely made it to the end of the, like I got dropped in the group ride and then I could still barely make it to the end. I'm like, well, I
Yeah,
can't run now.
right, right.
It's not in my best interest because I'm
Yeah,
trying to be a triathlete. I'm not
right.
trying to be
Hmm.
something that I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Oh, I love it.
and then John, what's the perception of transitions?
Boy, that's pretty unique to this sport. So,
Yeah. I can tell you one of the perceptions is, because I've heard this from other people, oh, it counts against your time?
yeah, yeah, right, right.
Really?
Yeah.
Like the general like thought process. I've talked to other people in other sports when we start talking about triathlon. Like
Yeah.
that's a thing that people believe is that
Yeah.
that might not count against your time.
Well, it's funny you say that because I know a lot of people, triathletes, are very guilty of figuring, well, if I swim this, I bike this, and I run this, that's going to be my time.
Yeah, if I do all those things, I'm gonna need 4 hours.
That's right. Why am I
Where's the time go?
doing four something, five something, whatever it is? And we do forget to add in that transition time that can be quite significant at some races. So let's say we've got Oregon coming up, and we know that that's got a long transition from the
On the
swim to the
boat,
bike.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I just did Massachusetts, and that was a long transition from both the swim to the bike, and then from the bike to the run. Both of those were very long. So
But
yeah,
Alcatraz, I had an 8 minute T1. Or
yeah, yeah. Right, right,
it's
right.
like a 0.8
Yeah,
mile run.
yeah.
And I like that. In fact, you bring this up, John, because people often do these things. Like, okay, like my goal is to do under 5 hours for a half
Hmm.
hour,
Yeah, right.
and they calculated it all out.
Hmm.
I'm like, do you know how long your transition is?
Right.
Well, no, let's go look. Okay, so last year, the average person in your age group did 5 minutes in T1.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're going to be right around that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, well, shoot, I'm not going to,
Yeah, right.
I mean, maybe T2 is shorter. Right?
Hmm.
But it's still 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. So now you got to add 7 minutes into that
Hmm.
goal. And
Hmm.
if the last 70.3 you did, it was maybe shorter, maybe it was a minute
Yeah.
T2 and a 2 minute T1.
Hmm.
Well, it's apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Not just the courses are different, but you're right, the transition areas are so different.
Well, this is why a lot of people wonder why don't we have qualifying for worlds or for whatever based upon time. All the races are just too different. You can't put a. It's not like running a marathon. Although we know that there's certain races that are fast races for Boston qualifiers, and those are very popular races. But it's people speak
Yeah, but
against
here's the
the
thing, you're not
sport.
going to make the Olympic team off of that,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
For,
Hmm.
for, for qualifying for the Olympics in the marathon, there is a marathon Olympic qualifying race. Now,
Yep. Yep.
and yes, you have to have a time to get into that race,
Hmm.
but still, everyone has to line up one day and race against
Yep.
each other to get one of those 3 spots. Is it
Hmm.
3 spots, I think, in the
I think so.
marathon,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, you're right. It's
Hmm.
exactly the same. And even in triathlon, even year to year on the same course,
Hmm.
it's like, oh, well, last year on this course, I was 5 hours.
Right. Right.
This year I felt better, but I went
Yeah.
5:05. Well,
Yeah.
what was the wind like? What was
Yeah.
the temperature? What
Wind,
was the
water.
humidity?
Yeah. Hmm.
There's all of these, other factors
Hmm.
that go into it. And it's even year to year, it's really, really difficult in
Mm.
triathlon to do that.
I usually have a time in mind, but I don't make time goals because
Mm.
of there's so many unpredictable things. I mean, I even know when I get out of the swim, I'll look at the clock or look at my watch and I'll look at the time. I'm like, okay, well, that is what it is. And I don't know if it was short, long, whatever it was, but uh, you got to be careful with setting time goals in triathlons.
I know we're getting a little long here, but the one thing that someone told me one time is like, whenever you look at your time, that's things that's already happened.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's nothing you can do about time. Like
Right,
you
right.
look at your watch and okay, I've been out here for 4 hours. That's
Hmm.
already happened.
Yeah,
It doesn't tell you anything about what's going to happen in the future,
right, right.
right?
Hmm.
Only, yeah. So like I'm really careful about like looking at my watch. And for example, in most racing, I don't look at my watch.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Hmm.
in half Ironman, the one time I do is in the first 2 miles.
Okay.
And I only look at it to keep myself
Slow
slow.
down. Yeah.
I don't look at it
Yeah.
to motivate me to go faster
Right,
in
right.
the first 2 miles. And
Hmm.
then after that, honestly, I go purely off of feel.
Yep.
I really, but maybe because I've raced enough and I get it. Like in my first race, I was like trying like, okay,
Yep.
these are my paces I need to hit.
Hmm.
Um, but like the problem with time is what happens when it goes bad?
Hmm. Yeah,
Like
right.
when you're on the bike and your goal was a 2:30
Hmm.
and it clicks over, you're halfway
Hmm.
and it clicks over and you're at 1:30.
Hmm.
and you're gonna have a 3-hour bike split instead of a 2:30 bike split. So do you go harder
Mm-hmm.
on the back half?
Mm-hmm.
You're never gonna make up that time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So yeah,
Well,
I'm like you, I'm really
again, I
careful with
think
that.
this is why, in looking finding that paper where triathletes had better mental skills, I think that's a skill set that a lot of us work on to be able to manage that. And so, because you're right, I mean, it doesn't take much to send you down the negative path, and all of a sudden, your whole race experience is negative simply because something didn't go the way you wanted it to. But we know with experience that something doesn't go right at one point, you can recover and recover that somewhere else. So I don't know. That's
If you get into a negative spot, it's really hard to recover.
it is, yeah.
You start looking at your
Without
watch.
the skill set to be able to get out of it.
Yeah,
Yep.
you start looking at your
Mhm.
watch and you're
Yeah.
saying, I'm gonna run 8-minute miles,
Yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
seeing nines.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then the next, let's say you're doing every half mile, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look and it's, oh, it's 9 again.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going faster.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take long to spiral out of control. And you know, and you get into this negative,
Yeah.
whereas
And
just
you
stop
walk away with a
looking.
bad experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just stop looking and start thinking of positive things.
Yeah.
And the next time it beeps, like, that felt like an 8:45.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And just lie to yourself. It wasn't 8:45. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
good. Like I'm starting to feel better. I'm coming around.
Yeah.
Rather than if it was a 9 again,
Mm-hmm.
like the things I'm doing, the mental coping things I'm doing aren't working. So
We got to come back and do another episode on mental skills. We got
yeah,
to do that.
I think so too. Because I know both of us have struggled
Yeah.
at times in racing with mental issues, and uh,
Hmm.
but it's interesting, John, you say that, because I think that's one thing that you and I both have done throughout the years is become mentally stronger,
Yeah. Right. Hmm.
and become more accepting of who we are and our own
Hmm.
limitations, and that we don't have Superman capes on our backs,
Yeah.
and
Right. Right.
we're just humans just trying to
Kind of
to
enjoy the sport.
enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to go all the way to Indiana to find a race to enjoy.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Right. Right. No, that's awesome. Wow, that's so cool. Well, that's good.
yeah. Thanks, John. Hey, I gotta go cook dinner.
I got to pack.
Oh yeah. Hey, have a great trip. When will you be back for next Friday night?
Yeah. Yeah. We're just going off for the weekend.
Okay, good. Well, have a good time.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. Hey, have a good night and enjoy cooking.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. Bye.
All right. Bye.